Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Workshop 7, Just Right. This is where we are going to spend some time talking about our decision point, how much. So this is a great spot because we've discovered kind of over time that this is the point in the workshop where people are starting to get the hang of this. But I wonder if any of you are still having some difficulty with identifying hunger or fullness, or eating mindfully, or still struggling with overeating. It's really very common at this point to have awareness, but not maybe have all the skills down pat yet. That is perfectly fine and acceptable. It's actually pretty expected. You have to continue to go easy on yourself and celebrate each moment of success. Most of us have done years and years and years of overeating and then subsequently years and years and years of dieting. There are lots of hard patterns that you're working through. This mindful eating thing isn't a one and done deal. This is a process of change, and people take different amounts of time to work through their own process before being able to fully adopt these new lifelong habits. So I know all of you had some opportunities, I'm hoping, to practice mindful eating this week, and I wonder how many of you found that mindful eating allowed you to eat less food and maybe with more enjoyment. I know in my own experience, this was definitely the case. And also I discovered that there were some foods that I actually just didn't really like. I just didn't realize it until I started practicing some of the mindful eating exercises myself. So today in our Think section, we're focusing on how much do I eat? We are really focusing on the concept that hunger and fullness scale that we introduced way back in workshop 2 can also guide us to feeling better when we're done eating than we did when we started. We brought up the idea a while ago, and now we're just going to kind of circle back to it. So we'll continue to explore the mindful eating cycle and focus on how much, as in, how much food do I eat and how much food do I need? This question focuses on the fullness side of the hunger and fullness scale. We'll also talk about what to do when you overeat. Notice I didn't say if you overeat, but rather when you overeat, because it is going to happen. Remember, overeating is part of normal eating, even when you eat instinctively. It just doesn't happen all the time or with all the guilt or punishment that we've typically associated with it. So hopefully many of you are feeling like you're getting better at using hunger to let you know when to eat. But maybe some of you are still struggling with stopping when you're satisfied instead of when you're too full. So today we're going to just fine-tune your awareness and learn some strategies to help you with eating until you feel just right. So think about what that means. Just right means that you feel satisfied. You don't need anything else. You feel content, fulfilled, pleased, maybe you're even happy. You're just right. So how amazing is it, or would it be, to feel satisfied when you're done eating? Eating the right amount of food isn't about being good. It's about feeling good. Who remembers and knows the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? Remember, she sat in the different chairs. She slept in the different beds. She tried the different bowls of porridge. And it took her a little while to figure out what was just right for her. Each of us on this journey needs to figure out what's just right for us and acknowledge even that maybe what's just right for us today might not be what's right for us tomorrow or the day after that, or maybe in 2 years. In this present moment, we have the ability to figure out what is right for us right now in this moment. Every decision point in the mindful eating cycle leads up to eating what you need to feel better when you're finished than when you started. So last week, we continued this process when we did our mindful eating experience, which we can use to help us eat until we're kind of just at that right point. So I want you to remember that experience, and also to recall any reading you did and any practice you did with your book or your workbook, and also think back to the other 6 workshops. And let's consider what you might have learned that's helping you make choices in eating that are actually just right for you. Mindful eating is about eating with intention and attention. So remember to set your intention. Your awareness and the hunger and fullness scale are your most useful tools for helping you determine when enough is enough. So ultimately, then you can eat with attention, not just to the food, but also to your body's signals. So maybe some of the strategies you might be using regularly, or maybe just occasionally, or maybe you need to be reminded of, are noticing how hungry you are. Perhaps you're setting an intention before you start eating by deciding how full you want to be at the end of eating. Maybe you're estimating how much food you'll need to eat to reach that intended level of fullness. Maybe you've gotten really bold and allowed yourself to survey all of the options so you can eat what you love. Do you find yourself ever picturing your fist or your balloon when you think about the size of your stomach? Are you prepping, serving, or maybe only ordering as much as you think you'll need? Or are you dividing your food on your plate into an appropriate portion size if you're served too much? Have you practiced visually or physically dividing your food in half to create a speed bump? Are you practicing eating mindfully, setting your fork down, savoring each bite? So just as you use your hunger and fullness scale to let you know when to eat, you can use it to let you know when you've had enough. Eat mindfully and tune into your body several times throughout and after your meal. So remember, the hunger and fullness scale goes from 1 to 10. So to keep any confusion that you might have down regarding the direction of how the scale goes, I like to remember 1 as being a small number, which means my stomach is small or empty. 10 being a big number, which means my stomach is big or it's full, or I'm feeling sick because it's so full. So identifying how full you are at the end of eating is really important. We talked about creating a speed bump and then taking the time to stop and check in with your body. So I also want to mention that I do recommend giving yourself a new hunger and fullness number like halfway through your meal, and then again at the end of eating. And then maybe again 20 or 30 minutes later, because it does take some time to catch up. So how can you decide how you feel at the point that you're checking in? So we've got some questions that you might want to ask yourself when you stop to sort of reassess, if you will. Do you feel comfortable? Are you content? Do you feel, food in your stomach? Am I aware, that my stomach is being stretched? Does my stomach feel distended or full? Do I have any discomfort? Do I feel energetic or sleepy and lethargic? Do I feel better right now than I did when I started eating? My hunger and fullness number right now. Because see, based on the answers to these questions, it can help you determine what your number is on the scale. Checking in several times can really help you learn. So after eating, I check into my hunger and fullness level. Now this could be either right after eating, or it could also be like 20 to 30 minutes later. This applies in both situations. So let's say you check in and you decide your number is a 4 or less. And remember, this means you're still a little bit hungry. So what are your options at this time? Well, you can wait for a little while to see if your hunger and fullness number increases, especially if you're at a 4 right at the end of eating and you know from experience that you'll feel more full 20 to 30 minutes later. Now, admittedly, it's very challenging to stop eating when you still feel a little hungry, but this is why a lot of the other tools we've worked on in the past weeks are really important, like noticing how much food it takes you to get to your satisfaction point at the 20 or 30 minute mark. Noticing how different foods affect you. Eating slowly enough so that maybe the hunger and fullness number has a chance to catch up with where you are. So another option is obviously you just can eat more now if you're still feeling a little bit hungry. You can also wait and just know that you'll be able to eat again in a little while. Now, stopping at a 4 is a really good strategy in a couple of instances. For example, if you plan to have dessert, or if you know you'll be eating again soon, maybe you're going out to lunch or dinner with friends or family or something. So stopping at a 4 is also a great idea when you're in a situation where you don't really want to feel food in your stomach, like before you exercise or before you go to an amusement park and hop on a ride. So 4 or less means you're still a little bit hungry and you have options. Wait, eat more, eat again, or just stop. Now, what if you notice you're satisfied? You feel great. In this situation, you really want to notice this feeling. So whenever you eat to a 5, sit with it and notice how it feels. If you're at a 5, you're not hungry anymore. There's no pangs, no discomfort, no irritability. You don't actually feel food in your body, stretching your stomach. You could eat more, but it isn't really necessary to have more food. You might notice, if you're being mindful, that food actually is starting to lose its flavor at this point. We talked about that before. See, sometimes we keep eating because it tastes so good, at least for the first several bites, right? But then we could potentially switch into mindlessness, and then we might just be eating the memory of the first few bites. But if we're really paying attention, we might notice that it really doesn't taste that good anymore, or our taste buds are maybe getting a little numb, or we're having a harder time focusing on the food and giving every bite our full attention when we get a little more full. So the awareness of how light and energetic and ready for your next activity, the awareness of how that feels, and then contrasting that with how sluggish and tired you feel when you're actually really full, can definitely help reinforce how pleasant this feeling is for you. Now, what about after you've finished eating and your hunger and fullness number is like a 6, where you're full? Remember, the size of your stomach is like the size of your fist. So a couple of handfuls of food fills your stomach. So 6 is kind of like just right over that. At this point, you can actually feel food in your stomach, or you're aware that you're full, but it isn't unpleasant. This is probably maintenance eating. I think a lot of people that I know, or that you may know, that are naturally instinctive eaters kind of describe this feeling as them feeling great or pleasantly full or something along those lines. And they seem to be doing just fine. So when you reach a 5 or a 6, you're done eating, providing that that was your goal or your intention that you set. But since most of us kind of have a habit of either cleaning our plate or eating until it's gone, or we're full or stuffed, we might need to build in some strategies to use in order to be able to meet the intention we had. So if your intention was to be a 5 or a 6, you can experiment with a couple of different things, like moving away from the table, or clearing food from the table, cleaning your kitchen, covering your plate, or packing up any leftovers. And remember, we talked before about maybe having a pleasant activity that's in place to follow eating, so that maybe we're more motivated in order to stop, so that we can engage in that activity. However, if it's some other thing that isn't any fun, or is a dreaded activity that's following mealtime, then we are far more likely to procrastinate that dreaded activity that we don't really want to do. So if you absolutely dread doing your dishes after dinner, and the result is that you keep eating dinner, save the dishes for later. Get one of the other family members to maybe pitch in and be the person that does the dishes, so that you can put something in place that's more rewarding for you. Now, what if you notice your hunger and fullness number is a 7, or an 8, or a 9, or a 10? You are very full at this point, maybe even feeling sick. Now, I want you to think back to the last time, or some other time in the past, where you ate too much food. What'd you feel like? Where was your energy? How did your body feel? I want you to think about that specific situation and jot down some words right now in your journal, or on a piece of paper that might be near you, that describes how you felt, so that you can cement that experience for yourself. Write it down, as many words as you can think about how that felt. When you're at a 7 to 10, at these levels, you are clearly aware that you've eaten too much according to how you feel. regretful, possibly sleepy. Again, notice that I'm intentionally using the word regret instead of guilt. Because what happens when you feel guilty for overeating or eating something that you, quote, shouldn't? Well, if you're anything like me, and most people, guilt is a powerful driver for your overeating cycle. But since you're in charge of the decisions that you're making, you don't need to feel guilty if you consciously decided to eat more food than you needed. Regret, on the other hand, means that you don't like how you feel right now in this present moment and you wish you hadn't eaten so much. Even people who eat instinctively, again, occasionally overeat for convenience or pleasure. They just sometimes regret it later, but since they don't feel guilty about it, it doesn't lead to more overeating. They just listen to their bodies and move on from there. So when you notice you've eaten too much, it's really important to recognize it, to acknowledge it, not with the intention of beating yourself up. That's just guilt talking. Instead, use this information and experience as a learning opportunity. Don't miss the lesson available to you. Don't check out or beat yourself up or promise you'll be better tomorrow. Instead, discover what you could do different or better next time. So let's take a minute to think about what happens when you've eaten too much, when you're in that overeating cycle. Well, most people just to keep on overeating, kind of with the mindset, well, I've already blown it, I might as well just keep on going. So overeating can actually trigger the urge to keep eating, which then leads just to more overeating. And at this point, there is kind of such a disconnect between what our brain's doing and our thoughts and our feelings and how our bodies actually feel. It's as if we intentionally tune out to what it's feeling like, even though we know consciously or subconsciously that in a little while, when it's over, we won't have any choice but to pay attention to how miserable we are. We're going to have to deal with it. So oftentimes in that overeating cycle, it sets off that chain reaction. Well, I've already blown it, or I am such a loser, or any other host of negative self-comments, and we just really get going down that path. So let's spend a few minutes focusing on this. See, the guilt and shame that come from the restrictive eating cycle, and the restrictive eating cycle is actually part of the overeating cycle. That guilt and shame we've learned from the restrictive eating cycle becomes yet another emotional trigger for eating. So the guilt and shame that we imagine is going to keep us in control actually begins to drive us more out of control. When we think about what happens when we overeat and what words you wrote down to describe that feeling, we're not just talking about physical feelings, are we? We focus on a lot of feelings of emotion also. But you're in charge of whether you choose to overeat. Overeating is an option for you, so there's no reason to feel guilty when you do it. Now, in the past, when you were supposed to be following your special diet or not eating certain things and you were supposed to be losing weight, of course, overeating was not an option. So when you did it, you felt guilty, right? And then that set off that chain reaction we just talked about. But when we're eating mindfully and we know overeating is an option and we consciously decide to do it for whatever reason, there's no reason to feel guilty. All you have to do is be aware that there are consequences and that you've chosen to deal with those. You aren't good or bad. You might physically feel good or bad. You may regret eating too much. You may rethink your decision afterwards and think about whether it was really worth the consequences. But the action of overeating in itself, in that instance, doesn't make you a good or bad person. You're simply in charge and you get to make those decisions. But now ultimately regret, it can be a helpful process, but not guilt. Guilt's the evil twin. Guilt keeps you trapped in the past, which you cannot change, and then it fuels your overeating cycle, your eat, repent, repeat cycle. So when you're in the mindfulness phase, you have the chance to focus on the present moment, which then kind of leaves the door open for you for learning and for change. So basically, when you've eaten too much, don't miss the lesson. Learn what you can from the experience. Notice how you feel both physically and emotionally. Sit with that discomfort and try to remember all of the details so you can recall them the next time you're tempted to keep eating. The goal is to become mindful about the effects of your choices. So let's talk about what to do when you overeat, and you will overeat. This is just part of normal eating. So we're using the mindful eating cycle again to help us on 2 levels. When you notice that you've eaten too much, you can re-enter the mindful eating cycle at any point. But now first, I want to sidetrack. I want you to think about what your favorite all-time movie is, right? Your very favorite movie. Now, if you turned on the TV tonight and saw that your favorite movie was coming on tonight at 11:30, would you stay up to watch it? It's your most favorite movie of all time. Now, if you do stay up to watch it, what happens the next day? Well, you might be tired. You might not be as productive at work or at home. Your energy may be low, right? Now, if the next night you notice, hey, lo and behold, look at that, it's on again, and maybe the first night you fell asleep toward the end, so you didn't actually finish watching it, would you stay up to watch it that night so you could finish it? Probably not, right? Why not? Well, because you remember the results of that decision that you kind of had to deal with the other day, and you don't want to feel like that again. So you might just say, hey, I'm going to just DVR it this time and watch it at a time that works better for my schedule and my life. So you see here in other places where we've made mistakes, staying up too late to watch our favorite movie, doing too many shots of tequila in college, or any other thing where we've made a mistake, we have been able to observe those mistakes. We've been able to learn from those results or consequences without getting into this huge shame, blame, guilt thing. We've been able to notice how it feels, and then as a result of that, maybe make a different choice the next time it comes up. To be able to say, hey, I love this movie. I don't need to deprive myself of it, but I can choose to enjoy it at a time where it won't be so loaded, maybe with negative ramifications. But where food's concerned, we really get caught up in the mindless action of eating it all and not thinking through how we're going to feel afterwards, and not realizing you can eat this food again later. You can have it tomorrow. You can eat this food anytime you want it. Just like watching that show anytime you want if you've DVR'd it, right? Nobody's taking away your food. You can have it the very next time you get hungry. And choosing to have it at a time where your result won't be feeling tired or feeling full, grouchy, miserable, and so on. So let's use the mindful eating cycle here. When we've overeaten, we want to take a minute to notice where the fuel is gone. Take a minute to notice, how do you feel in this present moment in your body? How do you feel when you've eaten too much? Bloated, stuffed, nauseous, queasy, right? Regretful. After eating, just sit with those quiet few moments, sit in your discomfort, become completely aware of how you feel and where your energy is going. Now, this is not about judgment. This is just about sitting with the information and the feeling. Try to remember all those details again so you can recall them the next time you're tempted to overeat. Ask yourself, does my abdomen feel bloated? Am I feeling stretched? Do I have pain? My clothes feel too tight. Do I have nausea? What's my energy like? Do I feel like doing anything right now? And then remember what it feels like when you're at a 5 or when you're at a 6 and you feel just right. You're light and you're energetic and you're ready for your next activity. So do you remember when we first talked about hunger and you learned about the hunger and fullness scale, I think back in workshop 2, how big did we say your stomach was? Well, it's about the size of your fist, right? So if your stomach is about the size of your fist, how much food does it take to fill it? Like 1 or 2 handfuls. Any more than that causes your stomach walls to stretch, so your stomach gets bigger, and when you've eaten too much, your stomach might be distended, and now your body's trying busily to process and store this excess fuel So that makes you feel sluggish. Now picture your stomach as a balloon, like we talked about in chapter 2. It takes very little effort to fill a balloon to the point of like mild tension. What do you have to do to fill it beyond that first point of tension? You have to take a deep breath and blow again. Now, if the balloon represents a very full stomach, imagine where you would fit it in your belly. What's it pressing on or pushing out of the way? Your stomach can definitely stretch far beyond its ideal capacity, but when it does, it takes up more room, and then it's going to put pressure on other areas, which causes you to then feel bloated and uncomfortable. So where does some of this excess fuel goes partly into making you feel uncomfortable and tired. So from now on, before you eat, past fullness, take a deep breath and think about that balloon and consider what will happen if you fill it too much. Then decide if that's what you really want to do, knowing how you'll feel. So why did it happen? What am I going to do differently? So after you've taken a moment to notice how you feel, take a minute and look back at the last eating cycle to begin to deconstruct, asking yourself, I wonder where I got off track. See, when we start looking at our last eating cycle, we can begin to kind of make plans for the future so we can actually figure out what we do differently so that that doesn't happen again. Let me give you some examples here. Why was I eating in the first place? Was there some specific thing that triggered my eating? Was I sad, mad, bored? Or was there something going on that might have triggered my eating and could have had some effect on then how much I ate? When did I get the urge to eat? Was I actually hungry when I started? Remember, if you aren't hungry when you start, of course, you're going to be full no matter how much food you eat. What was I thinking or feeling? What else was going on? Was I too hungry? When we get too hungry, we're more likely to eat fast and lose track of what we're doing. If I wasn't hungry, was there a physical, emotional, or environmental trigger present? Can I remember what was actually going on? What was happening at that moment that I chose to eat when I actually wasn't hungry? What did I choose to eat? And did that affect how much I ate? As an example, might be that sometimes when we're eating something that we think we shouldn't be eating, or that's been labeled as bad, then that can lead to overeating because we feel guilty, or we think, well, we might as well eat it all because we won't allow ourselves to have it again. Or sometimes when we eat something that doesn't taste very good, we keep trying to like it. I'm just going to try another bite and just make sure. Or we try to fix it. We throw a little salt or pepper on it and now see if we like it even better. Or maybe it needs to be warmer. And then the next thing you know, you're eating food you don't even like, almost unconsciously. You kind of check out of the process because you aren't getting any pleasure out of the process. Now in chapter 7, I want to mention there is a much bigger expansion of this concept and the causes for overeating. So if you are really struggling with overeating, take the time to read that section in that chapter. How did I eat? Was I mindful while I was eating, or what? See, obviously, if you're watching TV or you're on the computer or you're driving, it's much easier to overeat. Sometimes we start out mindful and then we become distracted during the process. So deconstructing this helps you think about, okay, so at what point did I kind of lose it? How much food? How much food did I have in front of me? If I have too much food in front of me, or if I've been served too much food at a restaurant, or have my serving trays available at family dinner time on my dining table, I might be more likely to eat more than I need. So what strategies do I have in place to prevent that from happening? Did I set an intention for how full I wanted to be when I was done eating? Where have I been investing my energy? When we're not practicing self-care, here's a little preview, and we're going to talk about more of this next week, but when we're not practicing self-care, when we're not taking care of ourselves, either physically, emotionally, or spiritually, we kind of leave these little holes that almost create a vacuum. And for many of you who have used food to fill those holes, you will notice that when you're out of balance in one area of your life, it'll show up in your eating. For some people that have been able to relearn to eat instinctively, that desire to eat when they're not hungry or to overeat winds up really being a helpful sign. It's an opportunity to realize that something else is happening. It's a cue that something else might need attention. So we just talked a little bit about deconstructing our eating cycle and looked at why we might have overeaten a little bit. Remember, you can begin to overeat at any point in the cycle. You can start eating because you're hungry. You might choose the perfect amount of food for you at that time. You might even eat mindfully. And then at some point during that meal, you might check out. And then it becomes an overeating episode. So don't think it all has to be, from beginning to end, or that it's always an indication of emotional eating. It may or may not be. Just know that at any point, you can slip into overeating. So the question is, will the people who eat instinctively ever overeat? And if so, what do they do? Well, yes, of course they do. We've covered this multiple times. Even people who eat instinctively sometimes overeat. They may choose to overeat at times for pleasure, convenience, or whatever. They usually just don't feel guilty about it, but they probably notice that they feel uncomfortable. So they just wait to eat until they're hungry again. They don't turn an overeating episode into an eat, repent, repeat cycle. Afterwards, they just go back to instinctive eating. But so if that's not natural for us, how can we move back into mindful eating when we overeat? Again, I'm not saying if we overeat, I'm saying when, because it will happen. Everybody does it from time to time. It's not anything to feel guilty about. The difference between somebody who struggles with it and somebody who doesn't is what happens afterward. Somebody who eats instinctively just returns to mindful eating naturally. But in our case, we can return to it mindfully. So next eating cycle, here we are, we're at our next eating cycle, and we've noticed how we feel after overeating, right? And then we just wait. Then after you've gathered your lessons from that overeating experience, let the episode go and just re-enter your mindful eating cycle with your next decision. So mindful eating starts again, like always, with why. And we use our awareness to naturally compensate for occasional overeating. And we pay attention to our body's cues. In overeating, we just disconnect. We don't pay any attention to what we're doing. But in mindful eating, we do the opposite. We tune in. We actually overly tune in to pay attention to what our body's cues are. So we might notice then, well, when do I feel like eating again? We're not going to start eating again because it's time, or don't keep eating because you think you've already blown it and you might as well keep eating. Instead, we wait. We wait until our bodies tell us there's a need for fuel and you're truly hungry to eat again. So when you're paying attention and looking for physical symptoms of hunger again, what do you think is going to happen? Your body won't need food as soon, so it'll take longer than usual to get hungry again. You may even decide you don't want your next snack or your next meal, or you might find the next morning when you wake up, you're not as hungry for breakfast as you usually are if you were eating late at night. Wait to see what you're hungry for. You might notice you're hungry for different things after you've overeaten. Personally, my very last experience with eating a little bit too much is that I remember specifically planning that and looking forward to that my next meal was going to be something very light and almost refreshing. I wasn't hungry at all at that time that I was thinking about it, but I remember almost craving something light and airy. I didn't want anything with rich or savory flavors or anything. I even told my husband that day when he asked what I wanted for dinner that night that I didn't think I was going to eat dinner. And that if I got hungry later, I would just have a little something. That just happened naturally for me as a result of feeling a little bit further along on that hunger and fullness scale than I wanted to be. Don't punish yourself or try to compensate for overeating by depriving yourself. Instead, ask yourself, what do I want? Put your head, what do I want? Cross your arms, what do I need? Trust your body wisdom. It really does often seek balance, variety, and moderation. So you might want something small or something light after eating a heavy meal. I know this was definitely true for me. And the more mindful I am, and the more I pay attention to my own body's cues, actually, the more amazed and aware I am of just how amazingly intuitive my body can be. And yours is too. So how do I eat in my next eating cycle? Well, I'm going to eat with intention and attention. Again, setting the intention to feel better afterwards than before eating, and being really mindful to being attentive to the eating experience. In that case, I'll be less likely to repeat my recent mistakes when I get back into mindful eating and notice that my body, again, in this present moment, which remember is the only moment you have control over whatsoever, right? It gives you the opportunity to notice your body right now. So how much? Well, you might not be as hungry. Obviously, if you had an overeating episode, you might not feel like eating very much. You might decide to serve, order, or prepare, or eat less as a result of that whole experience. Where do I invest my energy? Well, I'm not going to use exercise to punish myself for eating. Instead, I can use this fuel to live a more active life. People who eat instinctively frequently move a little more naturally to get their food going through their bodies. There's not any punishment involved, because the minute there's punishment involved, you're in a restrictive cycle. It's definitely not instinctive. So the point of all this is to feeling better after eating, not worse. So keep reminding yourself that you're not going through this process to deprive yourself of food, but rather to meet your physical and emotional needs more effectively. Learning a new skill, like stopping before you're too full, is sort of like teaching a kid how to ride a bike. Be supportive, positive, be non-judgmental, and just take it one step at a time. For some of you, figuring out why an overeating episode occurs might be challenging. Overeating is often a hard habit. So if you're often at a 7 or above after eating, look at your eating cycle to see where the problem might be. For example, are you able to identify hunger and fullness levels? Are you eating in response to environmental or emotional triggers? Are you choosing unsatisfying food? Are you eating mindlessly? When the underlying reasons aren't obvious, it's possible that they might just be buried under denial or maybe other coping methods. So I would tell you that if overeating continues for you without any progress toward identifying and coping with your triggers, then professional guidance might be useful. So as you're learning, it absolutely is possible to reconnect with your hunger and fullness cues, to eat when you're hungry and stop when you're satisfied. And for some of you, these connections have really returned very quickly. For others, it'll take more practice. But don't be discouraged. Use your mindful eating skills to eat until you're satisfied instead of uncomfortable. And when you eat beyond your desired level of fullness, don't miss the lesson. These are new skills, and it takes practice and encouragement. Just be patient with this process and with your progress, and eventually you will be back in charge. Alrighty, so let's move into Nourish. It's the little things. This section is about micronutrients. So we've already visited the macronutrients, the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Now we're going to talk about the little ones, the vitamins and minerals. So compared to macronutrients, these nutrients are needed in small amounts by the body. So the words are easy then to figure out. Micro means it's needed in small amounts. Macro means it's needed in larger amounts. You can use the chart It's called Vitamins and Minerals at a Glance, I believe, in the appendix of your book if you want to learn some more. It highlights a few vitamins and minerals like calcium and iron and sodium if you'd like more specific information on certain ones. But micronutrients are a really important topic. There's always tons of research that you can find regarding supplements and supplementing micronutrients. And I just want to impress upon you that taking a handful of supplements is not going to make up for a poor diet or a diet that's lacking in a balance of nutrients. So please remember that eating real food and trying to get your micronutrients from real food is definitely going to be better for you. Because certain foods, they work together in perfect harmony, if you will. And within a particular food, there may be several different micronutrients that are complementing each other or providing better absorption by eating it as a whole food. And this is certainly not always true of taking a single supplement as a standalone micronutrient. So once again, I believe food is the best initial source of obtaining your need for micronutrients. For most of us, when we follow the principles of balance, variety, and moderation, your micronutrient intake is likely to be sufficient, and it's probably not necessary to take a pill box full of supplements. But you know you. And if you can honestly say that you don't practice balance, variety, and moderation, then maybe you need to do a little more supplementation or a multivitamin or something like that. Or maybe you just need to pay a little more attention to your diet. Now, there are certain medical conditions, of course, or with vegetarians or bariatric surgery patients. In these cases, these are exceptions. Individuals do need supplementation. But most people in general don't need to track their intake of specific vitamins or minerals. Again, like everything, there's always exceptions. Calcium is a big exception. For example, you might need to look at your number of servings of dairy or other calcium-rich foods that you're consuming daily, and then compare it against recommendations, either maybe by your physician or a registered dietitian or something if you've had a recommended amount. So we go back to our principles of balance, variety, and moderation. Vitamins and minerals are plentiful in grains, fruits, dairy products, vegetables, lean proteins. But variety really is the key to consuming adequate micronutrients. If you're only eating spinach and bananas, then you're missing out. So not that there's anything wrong with spinach and bananas, of course, but if that's all you eat from those food groups, then you're not practicing variety. No single food has all of the micronutrients you need, so you do need to obtain a variety of them in your diet. For fruits and vegetables, fresh is best. Eat the skins if possible. Obviously, you're not going to chew on a orange peel or a pineapple rind. But frozen is second best. And then canned might be more convenient, but just be aware of any added salt or sugars that's being used for preservation. Optimize your intake of micronutrients. Take advantage of seasonal availability. Go for color. Vitamins and phytochemicals are found in greater concentrations in brightly colored fruits and vegetables. It's said because those are adaptation mechanisms that those plants have. Different colors help that plant to develop protective mechanisms from its particular environment. And so when you consume those get passed on to you. Almost all fruits and vegetables need to be washed carefully. If the food has an edible skin, try to eat it when possible. That does add an amount of fiber, which is very helpful. Usually when we make mashed potatoes at home, we frequently leave the skin on. And then I don't usually peel some vegetables that most people do, like cucumbers and carrots. I usually leave the skin on, or I peel them lightly and then leave some of the skin on. Don't overcook. Overcooking can leach out some of those nutrients. Now, organic is certainly an option if you prefer. For many foods, it may not be necessary, But you can do a little bit of your own research for yourself to determine which foods you think are worth spending the extra money on by buying organic. There is a list, which you've probably all heard of, called the Dirty Dozen, that you can look up. And these are fruits and vegetables that have been subjected to higher levels of pesticides and chemicals on them. So if you're going to spend extra money, you might want to look through that list and see what works for you in your grocery list. Eat superfoods daily, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. And then moderation isn't usually so much of a concern with most micronutrients unless you're taking supplements. And in that case, don't exceed the daily recommendations unless it's been prescribed by your physician, as that can be kind of dangerous. So go for nutrient-rich superfoods every day. And these are just a few examples. So we have strawberries, blueberries, kale, beans, legumes, broccoli, tomato, some different herbs and spices. And there is a list in your book also. These are all foods that are really nutrient-rich. And as you learn to prepare them in a way that tastes good, you're going to find yourself really looking to include these in your diet. So let us move on to our very last section for today, live, challenge your body. So last week, your action plan was to do strength training twice. And I hope that went well for you all, or at least for those of you that aren't already doing this on a regular basis. Hopefully you're getting a good return on your investment of time and energy. As you become accustomed to a more active lifestyle and your body adapts to your fitness program, you'll be able to increase and should increase your activity accordingly. So remember, we've been using the FIT formula to try and get the most from your physical activity. We've talked a lot about frequency, time, and type, but our topic today is really focused on intensity, the I of the FIT prescription. And the reason this is an important topic is that most of us are pretty busy, and most of us don't want to spend any more time than necessary. So the intensity part can really help us make sure we're being efficient. In other words, that we are getting enough of the benefit, the most bang for our buck, if you will, and that it doesn't take as long to get the benefit out of that exercise. So there's a couple of different measurements you can use to determine your intensity level. And the first one is called the talk test, which some of you have probably heard of before. But in general, basically, this is how it works. If you are exercising and you can sing and carry those tunes and hold those notes, then you need to pick it up. You need to boost up that intensity level. It's not challenging enough for you. If you can comfortably hold a conversation, keep going. This is like the perfect spot right here. So, and what I mean by conversation is, say if I'm home and I'm on the treadmill and I'm, walking on the treadmill and incline or whatever, and my husband calls, he should be able to recognize that something is going on. So he might say, "Hey, what are you doing?" So I can still carry on the conversation with him, but there's an awareness of exertion on my part. So that's that sweet spot in the middle, that comfortable place where you can carry on a conversation. If, on the other hand, you're gasping for air, holding on, can barely utter any words, you're wide open and you need to slow it down a little bit. So another way to measure your intensity is what's called the rate of perceived exertion. So perceived exertion encourages you to listen to your body in order to assess the intensity of your exercise. And the scale here, as you notice, looks very similar to the hunger and fullness scale. So it's kind of easy for you to remember it this way. So a 1 is minimal effort and a 10 is maximal effort. So for example, you're at a 1 right now, listening to this workshop. Well, unless of course you're listening to it as a recording and you've got it in your earbuds and you're on the treadmill, then you might not be at a 1. But in general, sitting here listening to this workshop, you're at a 1. But when you start exercising, you may start out as a 3 or 4, and as you warm up, typically move into maybe 6 or 7. But what we can also do is something called intervals, where we move from a more moderate or vigorous intensity, or from a moderate intensity to a vigorous intensity, and then back down, and so on and so forth. This is really a great way to improve your fitness level pretty quickly. So let's see. Let's talk about, I think I might have just skipped over to, heart rates a little bit. And you may or may not be interested in this information, so I won't spend too long on it. But we're going to talk about target heart rate zone. So typically, most people will carry a pulse between 600 and 160 and 100 beats per minute. Now, well-conditioned people might have a pulse of less than 60 beats per minute. And then we need to keep in mind that certain medications or other medical conditions can also affect heart rate. So in order to optimize your benefits from aerobic exercise, you should exercise within your target heart rate zone. This zone challenges your heart and lungs to work harder so that they ultimately become stronger and more efficient. So there are a couple of ways to calculate this, but this particular calculation is an easy way for you to calculate it for yourself. If you have a personal trainer that you use, they can calculate a more specific heart rate zone for you using something called the Carbonian formula. But this is a quick way for you to figure it out for yourself. And basically what you do is, in order to calculate it, you just simply take 220 minus your age. Then the result you get from that, you take that number and multiply it by whatever percentage you're exercising at to get your target heart rate. So most cardiovascular exercise is done somewhere between 65% on the low end and 90% on the high end. So again, you would take 220 minus your age and then multiply that by either 65% or up to 90%, depending on the intensity of your level. So some ways you can increase your activity or take it up a notch, if you will, is, again, consider doing an interval workout if you're not doing something like that right now. This takes your heart rate from the lower end of your zone to the upper end several times during the session. So if you are on a walking program or you're usually walking, you could run for 30 seconds and then walk and then run and then walk. And that would be an idea of interval training. Or even just speed up your walking and walk at, a very fast pace for a little while and then bring it back down. You could also consider signing up for an event like a 5K or so, in which case that would allow you to start training for something purposefully, and that's something you'd have to look forward to. Maybe try something new, maybe a class at the gym that you've never taken before. If you like to take cycling classes, maybe try a water class or some other type of class that you're not used to taking, or maybe take a hike or do something new that you haven't been doing normally. Just keep it interesting. Really, boredom is one of the biggest reasons that people will quit exercising. So spend some time thinking about ideas of how you can keep your exercise interesting. Consider setting goals and rewarding yourself for achieving them, maybe with a great new workout outfit, or a manicure, or a movie. Try new and different activities than what you're normally doing. Find an exercise partner. For some people, this is very beneficial. The accountability and the extra support winds up, it's a win-win. It helps both of you stay connected to your new plan and your goals. Change locations. If you always walk in the same place all the time, do something new. Maybe take it to a local park occasionally. Take a walk at the mall. Do something different. Go a different direction. And then, of course, you could always sign up for fundraising or a competitive walk or run. There's always 5Ks everywhere that are being offered for all kinds of fundraising activities, and you don't have to run them, but that's always a great option. So here, to wrap it up, we have learned how to work through an overeating episode and to remember always to take the lessons that were offered to us. We realize we can re-enter the mindful eating cycle at any time to get back in charge. We learned the general rule and intake recommendations for micronutrients, always using balance, variety, and moderation. We talked about ways to vary or find ways to increase your intensity as a way to stay motivated and active. So your action plan this week is, again, to set aside your 15 to 30 minutes each day for your reading, journaling and reflecting on this process, you're going to read chapters 7, 15, and 23 in your book and to use your awareness journal. Pay attention to your hunger and fullness levels during and after eating. If you're above the intention you set, just go back and ask yourself why it happened. And if you can figure that out, determine what you might be able to do differently next time. If you notice there's a particular micronutrient that you could improve upon, identify, if you can, at least maybe 3 foods that are good sources of this that you can eat more regularly. Vary or increase your exercise intensity to optimize your fitness routine. So in our very last workshop next week, we are going to focus on where your energy goes and explore the goal of optimal health. We'll talk about what to do if you find yourself off track. Just as a hint, it has something to do with the mindful eating cycle. You will learn about your exercise personality, and we'll apply some of the mindfulness strategies you've been using for eating to your physical activity also. And then you'll develop your next steps to continue to move forward after this workshop. So until next week, I hope you guys have a great week. Please continue to practice your mindful eating experience and some of these other strategies we've talked about tonight and in the prior 6 weeks. So until next week, I'll see you later.